I'm a 40-year-old man working as a finance manager at a local bank in a mid-sized town. My days are filled with numbers reports and managing a small team living in a community where people know each other. I've settled into a comfortable routine. My home is a modest house in a neighborhood filled with familiar faces. I find joy in small things. The laughter of friends during weekend get-togethers, the excitement in my children's eyes during family game nights, and the satisfaction of tending to my garden, the stability of my job and the predictability of my life have brought a sense of contentment. Bills are paid on time. Vacations are planned well in advance, and every day follows a familiar pattern. While others might find this routine dull, for me, it's a haven. It's a life built on hard work and consistent choices, reflecting values like responsibility, integrity, and dedication to family. Over the span of 15 years, our marriage was punctuated by important milestones. There were anniversaries celebrated with quiet dinners and surprise trips, the birth of our children, and the triumph of overcoming challenges like job changes and health scares. These events served as markers of our journey, each one a testament to our life and the love we believed would endure. Our shared accomplishments were not just personal, but also professional. We cheered for each other's career advancements and supported each other through decisions like moving to our mid-sized town for my stable job. We took pride in small victories too, like paying off our first car, renovating our home, or planning a family vacation abroad. Our marriage was not without its trials. We faced financial pressures, disagreements over parenting, and the regular stresses of daily life, but every storm was weathered together hand in hand. Even when it seemed insurmountable, these trials were woven into the fabric of our relationship, each one strengthening our resolve and reinforcing our belief in one another. Despite the ups and downs, there was a profound sense of contentment. We had built something solid, something that felt unbreakable. We laughed together, cried together, and faced the world together. I held an unwavering belief that whatever lay ahead, we would conquer it together. Our love was tested time and time again, and we had always emerged stronger. Looking back at those years, everything seemed to click. Our dreams were coming true. Our love was growing and the future looked bright. We believed in us, in what we had and what we could achieve. Over time, subtle shifts began to creep into our marriage. Once clear lines of communication seemed to blur, conversations that used to flow effortlessly became stilted. Smiles that came easily were replaced with blank stares. Arguments became more frequent. At first they were about trivial things like household chores or plans for the weekend, but gradually they became more intense and lingering, exposing underlying issues we had never faced before. A detachment grew between us, a widening gap that seemed impossible to bridge. I started feeling like a bystander in my marriage, watching as something precious slipped away. Even when we were together, her mind seemed far away. The dreams and plans we shared were replaced with a silence that was both deafening and confusing. My wife's job as a pharmaceutical rep had always been demanding, but now it seemed to consume her. The late-night calls, the long trips away from home, and the constant stress started to take a toll on us both. I found myself growing uneasy about her frequent travels. Questions began to form in my mind. Why were there so many late-night meetings? Why did she seem so distant? Even when she was home, I tried to understand, to believe that this was just a phase, that the woman I had married was still there behind the demands of her job and the strains of daily life. But doubts began to grow, feeding on the small changes and the growing unease. Something was off, and though I couldn't put my finger on it, the feeling was impossible to shake off. My wife's job as a pharmaceutical rep was more than just a career to her. It was a calling. She had an uncanny ability to connect with clients, to understand their needs, and to represent her products with a genuine passion. Over the years, she climbed the ranks, becoming one of the top reps in her company. Her success was a source of pride for both of us, reflecting her hard work, intelligence, and dedication. Her role required frequent travel to different cities, meeting with healthcare providers, attending conferences, and networking events. The glamorous hotels and business dinners were part of her world. One that was exciting, but also demanding. Late nights, early flights, and the constant pressure to perform were all part of the package. Her phone was never off. Her email was never closed, and her suitcase was always packed for the next trip. While I admired her success and celebrated her achievements, there was a part of me that was concerned about the toll her career was taking on our relationship. The long hours, the weekends away, the constant juggling of her professional and personal life. It all started to add up. I found myself missing the woman who used to put us first, who used to have time for our dreams and our life together. My pride in her accomplishments was tinged with a longing for the connection we once had. Her success was not the problem. It was the growing distance. The feeling that her job was not just a part of her life, but had become the entirety of her life. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the balance we had once maintained so effortlessly had shifted. Her career was thriving, but at what cost to us? I tried to be supportive, to understand, but the doubts and fears lingered, hinting at something deeper, something that neither of us was willing to face. It was a Sunday like any other. With my wife away on another business trip, I decided to tackle some cleaning, something to keep my mind occupied and the loneliness at bay while rummaging through a drawer filled with forgotten gadgets and tangled cords. My fingers stumbled upon an old iPad. It was the one my wife used to use before upgrading to a newer model covered in dust. It screamed dull and lifeless. It seemed like a relic of another time. I decided to charge the old iPad. Maybe there were pictures on it. Memories of happier times, something to fill the silence of the empty house. The iPad charged. I sat down to explore its contents, expecting nothing more than a trip down memory lane. Well, what I got was something completely different. As I navigated through old photos and forgotten apps, a notification caught my eye, unopened messages, intrigued. I opened the messaging app and my heart stopped. Messages from two different men filled with words that tore through me like knives, intimate conversations, plans, explicit photos, secrets, all laid bare in cold digital text. The truth was unmistakable. My wife had cheated. I spent the rest of the night reeling, lost in a haze of confusion and grief. How had this happened? How had I not seen it? How could the woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, betray me in this way? The following days were a blur of emotion and confusion. The evidence was there, undeniable, but confronting my wife, the woman I had loved and trusted for 15 years, was a task I dreaded. I knew that I had to face her to demand answers, but how does one prepare for a conversation that will undoubtedly shatter everything? She returned from her business trip, weary, but smiling, unaware of what was about to hit her. Her cheerful greeting stuck in my throat as I faced her, the iPad in hand, with anger and disbelief. I asked her outright, showed her the messages, and watched her face turn from confusion to realization. And then to a desperate panic. She began to apologize profusely, tears streaming down her face, her words, a torrent of excuses, explanations, and pleas for forgiveness. She claimed it meant nothing, that it was a mistake, that she loved me. Still, her words, once so comforting, didn't mean to me. Now her apologies seemed rehearsed. Her excuses feeble. She wanted to try marriage counseling to work things out, but I could only see the betrayal. I told her, no, my decision was final. I could not forget. I could not forgive. The trust that had been the bedrock of our relationship was gone, destroyed by her actions. She continued to plead, to beg. Even as I walked away, she was super desperate, but it was too late. The damage was done and there was no turning back. The decision was made, but the path ahead was fraught with complexity and emotional turmoil. I began the process of seeking legal counsel, navigating the labyrinthine legal system and facing the reality of disentangling our lives. The logistics were overwhelming, but the emotional toll was even greater. The divorce proceedings were painful and draining. There were assets to be divided, agreements to be reached. And every step was a reminder of the betrayal and the love lost despite her pleas for reconciliation. My wife was compliant in the legal process. She wasn't seeking alimony and she seemed resigned to the divorce, even though her eyes still held a glimmer of hope. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, a somber occasion that marked the end of a 15-year journey. In that courtroom, we faced each other, no longer husband and wife, but adversaries in a legal battle. My wife's plea for reconciliation persisted. Even there, her voice broke as she asked the judge for more time, a chance to save the marriage, but it was too late. The judge ordered us to split all assets. And my 15 years of marriage was over just like that. To this day, I still haven't told our kids who were in college that was agreed upon until they come home for break. About 7 months after the divorce, we sold the house and split the equity. Even at the closing. So many months after the divorce, my ex-wife was still trying to get back with me. I simply told her, no chance in hell that was happening. This happened 18 months ago. Our kids know now, and they wanted to know what happened. And I told them to say they were devastated. Here is another story that was sent by a listener. This happened to him about 2 years ago, as he says, let's go. I am 51 and my wife is 50. I am a foreman for a large construction company here in North Carolina. And my wife works as a manager for a large clothing store in the mall. I was married for 19 years, just 2 years ago. My marriage ended and I walked in on my wife with someone I never knew existed. She never displayed any red flags. I had access to her phone. I had access to her computer and she had access to mine. When she did girls' night, and yes, she did girls' night, but she always had her phone location turned on and always came home at a reasonable hour. I wasn't really big into social media, but she was and used it mostly to advertise discounts at a store. We don't have any kids together, but I have one son from a previous marriage. My first marriage ended because my ex-wife was an undercover meth head, but I quickly recovered from that marriage and moved on with my life. And then I met my current wife at another store she was managing at that time. I struck up a conversation with her. And from then on, we started dating right away. And we've been together ever since. About 2 years ago, I came home from work and my wife was already home, which was surprising because I usually got home before she did. But the strange part was she was on the computer. And when I walked through the front door, she quickly closed her PC. Now in the whole time we have been together, she has never done that, never. But I didn't dwell on it. I just thought it was odd. Fast forward 2 weeks, my wife calls me at work to tell me she is going out with a couple of her girlfriends after work. She has always done this. And I told her I would just see her at home later. She didn't get home until almost 3 a.m. And I let her have it. I was so angry, we got into a huge argument and my angry feelings toward her lingered well into the next day. She apologized later and I accepted her apology and didn't think anything else of it. A few weeks later, I was at home just relaxing from work. When my wife comes walking through the door, telling me she had a bad day at work, she had to fire an employee, which upset her. I was sympathetic and just tried to listen as to why she told me the reason she had to fire one of her employees. This woman was actually one of her assistant managers and she had to fill this job rather quickly. Until then, she had to take on her job and told me some days will be way longer than others, to which I told her I understood. Fast forward a couple of weeks and my wife's schedule has changed drastically. She is getting home later from work and seems to be a little stressed when she comes home. I got off work one day a little early and went to the mall where my wife's store is. But by chance, I run into the young woman my wife supposedly fired. I have seen her face in the store at times and made small talk when I was visiting my wife. We started chatting and she tells me that she enjoyed working for my wife, but my wife didn't want to pay her more money. She was essentially doing my wife's job. She told me on a few occasions, my wife left work early to go hang out with her girlfriends. So she gave her a 2-week notice, but then she started giving me certain time frames of when my wife left early to go hang out with her girlfriends. Turns out my wife lied to me each time. Basically, her manager was covering for her. I was surprised she was telling me this, maybe because she had some type of vendetta against my wife, but it caught my attention. After our conversation, I went to my wife's store and didn't tell her the conversation I had with their former employee just around the corner. After hanging out with my wife a bit, I drove home only to be thinking about what this woman told me about my wife leaving her store early and being dishonest about it. Lots of things were going through my mind. Why would she be dishonest like that? Well, when she got home that evening, we had a long sort of heated discussion about those time frames. She basically came back with, she didn't want to be out too late, so she had her employee cover for her and she was drunk a few times. That night led to a dead bedroom. As a matter of fact, that dead bedroom lasted a few weeks before I really started to notice a huge shift in my wife's behavior. My wife started going to the gym all of a sudden and she didn't invite me. And I only found out that she had a gym membership because she left work early and one of her employees said that's where she went. It was beginning to feel like my wife was becoming a totally different person. She never kept anything from me, never. Fast forward a few hours, my wife came home from the gym, but she wasn't wearing gym clothes. And I didn't say anything to her about me visiting her store and me knowing about her new secret gym membership. My wife gets home and doesn't say one word to me, didn't even ask me how my day was, nothing. She just goes to the shower and I am left in the living room, not really sure what is going on. She didn't come back out of the bedroom, but her phone was on the kitchen counter. I picked it up and it immediately asked me for a password. That's when I knew something was up. The fact that she is leaving work early, a sudden gym membership and a password on her phone, she's never had a password on her phone. Fast forward a week and my boss tells me that I need to go to Charlotte for a bit on an upcoming project in that city. He said he will pay me for the travel time, etc. So before I tell my wife, I asked my neighbor who was an older guy who was retired from General Motors to keep an eye on the place for a couple of days. He agreed, and for someone in his 70s, he knows his tech. So he gave me some recommendations on some indoor cameras and where to put them. I have always wanted cameras, but never got around to installing them. But this was a perfect opportunity to install some since I would be gone for a few days and my wife will be home by herself. Well, that night I told her I will be leaving for a few days. It was a Wednesday night and I would be back Saturday for sure. Then she says to me, "Why are you leaving to go bid on a job?" I said, "My boss doesn't have anybody else to do it besides him, but he is already bidding on another job." Mid-morning, I leave for Charlotte. My wife had already left for work and it takes me about 3 hours to get to Charlotte. When I got there, went to the hotel, checked in and sent my wife a text to let her know I made it there. It was strange. She was giving me a play-by-play of her every move, but she didn't know I had cameras outside and inside, including the bedroom. My wife and I texted each other for most of the night and even FaceTimed each other. The cameras didn't show anything, but she was on her phone quite a bit and moving around the house, but nothing suspicious. At 11 a.m., I get an emergency phone call from my boss. He needed me back because another one of the workers had an emergency at home. So I told him I could be back as early as this evening. I did not tell my wife I was coming back a day early. I would be getting back early enough to take her out to a nice restaurant. So I head back home and when I get there, it's just getting dark. My neighbor's car is gone. His house is dark, but I can see from a distance, there is a car in my driveway parked behind my wife's car. I stopped. I didn't pull all the way up. I parked a few hundred yards away from the house. I went to the side door of the garage, used my key and opened the door gently. And when I went into the garage, there it was, a man's voice in my house, laughing with my wife. I waited, grabbed the axe that was right next to the door. There were a few minutes of silence. Then I hear them walk upstairs to the bedroom. When I heard them make it to the bedroom, I opened the door to the inside of the house, take off my shoes and walk up the stairs. My heart is pounding and all of a sudden, they both start making sounds. The door to the bedroom is open. I peeked my head around and there they were having sex. I stood there for a good 60 seconds before the guy noticed I was there. He says, "Oh shit." My wife screams, "I am not a small guy. I am 6 feet 2 inches, 250 pounds, and a little overweight. This guy wasn't going anywhere, at least at the moment he wasn't." My wife is saying, "Please, please." At that moment, I raised the axe I have in my hand and told them both, "Get the fuck out." When they left, I just sat on the couch, just in a daze of what happened. Once I was able to calm down, my wife starts blowing up my phone and I blocked her. I called my brother and told him what happened. He was at my place within 30 minutes. My brother said to me, "Let's get you out of here." I packed a few things and went to stay at my brother's place. Then my wife started calling my brother, but he ignored her calls. The next morning, I go to work and spill my guts to my boss. He was floored and told me if I can't work, he would understand. I told him I could work, but would need some time to take care of this mess legally. Fast forward a week, I gathered the footage from the cameras, hired an attorney and my wife was served at the house. I have not seen her since that night. 2 months later, at the divorce hearing, my wife had an attorney and their attorney was trying to get alimony out of me, as well as trying to get the house to herself. But the judge said that based on the evidence in front of her, she forfeited that with her infidelity. The judge called it marital misconduct. I have never even heard of it. After everything was said and done, she did not get any alimony. She didn't get any of my retirement, but she will get half of the assets we own in the house and about 20% of the equity in the house when it's sold. Unfortunately, the judge allowed her to stay in the house. I told the judge I didn't want to stay there. I had a place to go. About 4 months later, the house was sold. I took my material belongings and she took hers. I have never seen or heard from my ex-wife since the divorce hearing. My brother said he was at the mall one day, walked by her store and my ex-wife was talking to a customer. She sent me a letter one day to my brother's place. He called me and told me, I told him to tear it up and throw it in the trash. It's been 2